Hey there, and welcome back to the second part of my review for the finale of Stranger Things 5, The Right Side Up. It's picking up exactly where the last one left off, and so let's jump into it. Then it's back to the Abyss, where we have a fun little scene with Nancy and Mike, where Mike asks her to share one of her guns, as otherwise he'll be toast. That being said though, since we know that guns do almost nothing to Demos or Vecna, I feel like he mostly just wants one for the excitement of being able to say he held a gun. This scene just made me laugh, both with his manipulations, but then also her giving him a flare gun. Then for some reason, despite being Mr. Hive Mind and being able to sense Vecna and his goons, Will is walking at the back of the group, so when he stops and starts having a vision, it takes a good while for anybody to notice, which seems like very bad tactics. It's like having your radio on mute. They eventually notice and Will tells them that Henry's still alive before we cut back to the man in question for some of the best and most intense acting of the season, as he knows that it's crunch time. If he wants to be able to win, he knows he has to enter into the memory, but he's scared because he knows it's his origin and it's been repressed. The Mind Flayer doesn't really want him to see this part just in case, so he looks terrified and very conflicted. His frightened and yet furious eyes, the heavy breathing, it all just works so well and actually kind of made me feel a bit sorry for him. The acting is insane here. He begins to enter the cave and he's immediately assaulted by the different memories, which causes him immense pain and slows his progress through the cave. He begins to scream, and of course, this causes Will pain as he can see it all happening. Will tells his group in the Abyss that the kids are all alone, with Robin suggesting that he could perhaps use his powers to try to hold off Henry until they can save the kids themselves, whilst in Camazotz, the kids flee through the desert towards the mine shaft. So now things really start to pick up and get way more exciting in the episode itself. These sequences with Henry chasing the kids are honestly some of the season's best work, and then I also love the battle in the lab too. Speaking of which, we see our lab trio making their way through the stairwells and corridors trying to evade the military, only for them to suddenly get blasted by the sonic gun that only affects them for some reason. Hopper of course grabs Al and leaves Carly behind, which at first thought does feel a little bit rough, but in the end, it's his kid and this other person is straight up encouraging her to commit suicide. I think I would have left her behind as well, and it's not like he just abandons her either. He does come back to try to save her once he's able to get Al to relative safety. This section where the music's getting more and more intense and it's cutting back and forth between the kids running for their lives from Henry and Hopper escaping the soldiers is so exciting and had me on the edge of my seat. He gets Al to safety and then she of course asks for Carly, and so he goes back for her. It would have been very easy to just leave her to her fate, but credit to him, he goes back just as she's being apprehended by some goons that Hopper kills like they're absolutely nothing. How this middle-aged small-town cop constantly gets the drop on highly trained special force operatives never ceases to amaze me, but it was pretty awesome visually. That being said, when he gets to Carly, he is instantly knocked out by Crazy Eyes. I will say this felt a bit plot armory to me too. I mean, they have the hedgehog blasting the building, and so they know that Al can't use her powers to escape and can't have gone too far. She has to be in there as they were staking it out before the reinforcements came. Plus, Hopper legitimately just killed a bunch of their comrades. I'm surprised he is still alive at all. The dude has nobody but himself to blame for his own death, because if he just killed Hopper and Carly straight away, he would have probably found Al before Murray had the opportunity to blow up the chopper with his improvised grenade, and it would have been game over. Then again, it would also mean the world would end, so instead, he gets brutalized. Carly indicates to Hopper that she doesn't want him to save her, and that he needs to sacrifice her life to protect Al, which is followed by an epic slow-mo sequence where Murray blows up the chopper just as Crazy Eyes is about to execute her. I did note that you don't actually see her get shot here, and for the ending where Al survives to work, I kind of think she needs to be alive, right? You can't do the illusions if you're dead, but I also don't think she's surviving a gunshot wound like that, at least without immediate medical intervention. So what do we reckon? Did she fake her own death here? Did she straight up fake being shot to begin with to give Al a chance to live? After all, it's clear that her perspective on everything began to shift after she heard Hopper's speech to Al begging her to live. Plus Hopper leaves and Al's sobbing and screaming, but when he returns and finds Carly dead, Al is way more subdued. Maybe because Carly revealed it's all an illusion and that she has a plan. After all, she would know that she's no longer any help to Al fighting against Henry, seeing as she had different powers to begin with. So they might have had time to create a little plan for what's going to happen next. Back to Henry, Holly gets a lot of her friends through the tunnels and passes the rockfall, but realizes there won't be enough time for everybody to get there with Henry following them. So she picks up the fire poker she left behind and truly gets to be Holly the heroic. Henry makes his way through the tunnels calling out for Holly again, and once again this dude's facial expressions are off the charts. He keeps going along until she appears behind him and smacks him with the fire poker a couple of times before he knocks her out. Yes, it's clear she never would have been actually able to defeat him here, but it was a nice conclusion of her arc. She went from the frightened little girl who froze whenever she was confronted by Vecna or his monsters, to somebody who was able to mastermind the escape with Max, and then led the children to escape after her protectors got removed from Camazotz, shots before confronting him directly to buy more time with her friends. Her story across this season has been so good, and I know there are those that think her character wasn't needed and it took time away from the OGs, but it was so good to me that it was worth it. There was honestly enough time for everybody, they just didn't use it. As he goes to get her back again, he hears his traumatic memory begin to play, and he goes to watch it, completely terrified and yet seemingly unable to look away from it. He feels the gunshot in his hand, and Will feels it too within the abyss. I keep forgetting he's watching all of this happening. Once again, Vecna is the best acted character in this entire show, and I really hope this dude's career gets bigger and bigger because he's so damn talented. I don't think it's often you can introduce your main villain so late in the story, with him only first appearing in season 4, and turn him into one of the most interesting, engaging characters of all, even with fairly minimal screen time when you think about it. I think it largely succeeds because of the quality of the acting for the character. Back at the lab, Al and Hopper make their way to the roof, and there's an awkward moment where Murray's celebrating and demanding praise for saving them by blowing up the chopper, only to realize that Carly isn't there, and that judging by their expressions, she must be dead. I will say this did give me a good giggle, and helped to take the edge off somewhat, as it is all rather heavy besides this little moment. Al decides that she can use some of the floating rocks to get into the abyss where she can fight Vecna, and here she has a heart-to-heart with Hopper, where she talks to him about how he took her in and looked after her, how he protected her and then became her dad. She then says she's not a kid anymore. She isn't Sarah. Sarah didn't have a choice in her fate, but Al does, and she needs him to trust her to make the right one in the end. That she needs him to believe in her. To me, this feels like a perfect second part to his speech to her about fighting for the better days and for a better future. With Carly dead, I thought that maybe this storyline would also end, and this would be her trusting in herself to keep going. Not so much though, and so once again, scenes like this fall absolutely flat for me. Then we're back to our goat Henry, who's still watching the memory and having a mental breakdown at the same time. This is one of the most pivotal scenes in the entire episode, to tell you the truth. After he beats the dude with the rock, young Henry opens up the briefcase and finds the Mind Flayer stone. When he picks it up, he receives a vision from the Mind Flayer telling him to find it. The rock then dissolves into his gunshot wound, giving him powers, whilst also putting him under the control of the Mind Flayer. From here, the dude that was bludgeoned, who's somehow still alive and conscious, tells young Henry to resist it. But the vision of the Mind Flayer flashes again, and Henry kills him, blowing up his eyes, before running away in shock. This is where they teased a Henry redemption. He's crying alone in the tunnels, and Will tries to get through to him by saying that this was never him. It was the Mind Flayer controlling everything, and Henry's just like Will. He's a vessel for the Mind Flayer who didn't have a choice, just like Will didn't have a choice when he was being controlled. Now he knows the truth though, he can try to fight it. Henry, however, says this isn't true. It never was. That he could have resisted the Mind Flayer, but it showed him the truth about humanity and the world, and that they were broken. Thus he chose to join it, because it needs him, and he needs it. They're one. Of course, as this is happening, in the abyss, the lair is revealing itself to be this giant spider creature who is incredibly awesome looking. So I guess this scene is why they didn't include any demos in the final battle, as they felt like it would be enough, and also this was probably really expensive. I guess I kind of understand that perspective, which is why I think they needed to have a reason for no demos. Maybe they should have had Will nuke them all at once when Vecna was weakened or distracted. Anyway, back to Henry. I saw a lot of people hyped up about this because they feel like the redemption was offered and rejected, and thus he is unambiguously evil. However, is that actually even true? I will say that I did like that he doesn't come back to himself and try to resist the power of the Mind Flayer. He is too far gone for that, and I think it creates a really great contrast between himself and Will in that regard. In Will's case, he was able to overcome the corruption and mind control because he had a family and friends that wouldn't give up on him. I think it's pretty clear that Henry didn't have the same thing, and nobody to help him fend off this power. However, that being said, I do think people are taking his words at face value here when he says he was all aboard and always was. How do people actually think this is true? He bursts into tears when he sees his younger self beating down that man, and then becoming one with the Mind Flayer. He very obviously deep down doesn't view it as a positive, and then when Will's trying to talk with him mentally, he tells him in this sad little broken voice to leave him alone. I think it's more likely that he, much like Will earlier in the season, rationalizes everything as being his fault, and thus he must have been in control, and thus he must want this. Think of that scene from a couple of episodes ago where Will was crying to Joyce about how it was all his fault. It feels much the same. Plus, I also think there's an element of him knowing that he is too far gone, and the Mind Flayer's corruption having spread through him too much. I mean, in the stage play, I thought the idea was that Henry was still fighting it for some time until eventually succumbing to its influence. So I'm not sure why people are taking this as Henry always having been a bad egg, or having always chosen this darker path, you know? Instead, I feel like it made him into a tragic villain who had to die, but you can also feel sympathy for as well. It was great writing. Here is where the final battle well and truly kicks off, as suddenly, completely outmatched and outgunned, the party are forced to run away from the Mind Flayer, but of course, being giant, it easily catches them, and is about to kill them when Al throws a boulder at its head and they have a stare down. To be honest, honest, all of this is pure hype for me. Just some superhero shit at this point in the best sort of way, and I think visually it was great. I love the wide shot of the Mind Flayer and Al both charging each other. It goes so hard and got me so hyped up. She leaps up and tears away inside and attacks Vecna, and that hype just keeps growing. I was feeling giddy with excitement by this point when Al's standing there facing down Vecna and the ominous music kicks in. They begin their battle, and I will say it was pretty cool. It's like a Jedi battle only using the Force and no lightsabers, and it does feel like they got as creative as they could without giving either Vecna or Al some random new powers to do something flashy. I especially love when Al used the sand on the floor to hide and then ambush him. It was rather clever. I also like that while she puts up a fight, that she isn't actually stronger than him. She does need help, and so the party doesn't just become bystanders in the fight. The party realize this too, and so they decide that they have to help, and that's by rushing up onto the very tall cliffs, whilst Nancy lures it into a canyon. They hope that this will let them target its head and do some damage, weakening the hive mind and allowing Al a better chance of killing Vecna. However, it does get a little bit goofy at times too. Nancy decides she's going to be bait for the monster, and yet despite this being an ambush, she starts shooting immediately, which means that 1, at this distance the Mind Flayer would surely catch up with her before she reaches the canyon, and 2, her allies would not have time to get to the cliffs in time. That's okay though, because the script slows down the Mind Flayer enough while speeding up the party. You just kind of have to accept it, even if there were better ways to set it up. The actual ending though is pretty cool, with them just lighting this thing up, which in turn weakens Vecna and allows Al to start stabbing him on a spike in his lair, with Will using his powers to stop him counterattacking and then straight up ripping off his arm. With Vecna being mortally wounded, so too is the Mind Flayer body, and so it collapses, which allows Nancy to run inside and free Holly, with Mike then arriving for a big family hug. This whole section where the kids are freed was so sweet, especially my boy Derek hugging Steve and looking all shaken. Steve's reaction to it as well is just so adorable. At this point, Vecna starts moving and Joyce walks up to him, blasts him with a one-liner, and then starts cutting off his head very slowly. Honestly, I'm surprised this even worked, considering bullets and shit did nothing to him at all when the military attacked him, and in season 4 he took a shit ton of punishment as well. I guess she was able to cut through his vine neck because he's dying and his powers faded. Even then it takes a lot of swings. Still, I like that they actually gave Joyce something to do, because otherwise she would have felt like a complete non-entity in the final battle when she was once one of the show's most crucial characters, you know? I also thought it was great to remind you of all the characters' personal stakes in the fight, just to give you some extra satisfaction in the ultimate defeat and death of Vecna and the Mind Flayer after all they've done to this collection of people. We then cut to Hopper and Murray waiting on the roof of the lab for the all clear, which is when they're contacted. Here we have another scene which serves to piss me off. Dustin reports that they're all safe. The whole party, including Al. Now obviously in hindsight it's building up to her sacrifice, but in the end it's such bullshit, you know? All of these scenes about a better tomorrow and a future, it just gets tossed out of the window. I mean, the stuff in the back of the truck is cute and all, but yeah, it just gets ruined in my eyes. Also, is there any genuine reason why the hell they decide they're just gonna leave the Upside Down the same way they came in? I mean, they know that there'll be soldiers there. Why are they seemingly so surprised about it? Any idiot would have known this. Why didn't they leave through one of the numerous other exits to the Upside Down? I know they'd then have to go through Hawkins on foot, but it's better than driving a truck into a base filled with armed soldiers. They get stopped and dragged out of the back of the truck, and we can see those sonic guns are blasting, so Al wouldn't have been able to use her powers, and not only that, she would have been crippled by this. Every time she or Carly were hit previously, they were screaming, doubled over in pain. There are multiple ones blasting here. Somehow it doesn't work though? I just don't really get it. No single way that they could do this makes sense to me. In scenario 1, she just dies. But she shouldn't have been able to make it to the portal to begin with, and she wouldn't have been able to use her powers to speak to Mike and say goodbye like she does. In scenario 2, we have the Mike perspective of Carly being alive and using her powers from a distance to make Al invisible and allow her to head for the tunnels. But this also runs into issues. If Carly's alive and wounded, how the hell has she lasted this long? It was a bad wound after all. Let's assume she survived it or faked it though. How does Al manage to escape? She's invisible. So what? She's still getting blasted by multiple sonics and she should be screaming and in pain. She would struggle to get to the entryway of the tunnels in the time it would take for the explosion to close the portal, and once the connection cuts off, they'd all be able to see her because Carly is dead and her power's gone. She also wouldn't have been able to use her powers to talk to Mike at all about her choice and say goodbye, which means that this would have to be Carly talking as her to trick Mike, which just cheapens the whole scene. Then there's option 3 of Carly and Al planning this while Hopper was off getting bandages, and they create a fake Al at some point during the aftermath of the battle to allow Al to get out of a different portal and thus be able to fake her death whilst giving Mike closure using telepathy. That being said, that also doesn't hold up too well because aren't Carly's illusions dispersed with touch, and we see Mike touching Al when they're in the back of the truck, and there's no time to swap out at that point. It's all very confusing and maybe I've missed something, but but I do feel like none of the options make sense. That being said, this whole sequence is very emotional if you can look past the unsatisfying ending. So the scene with Mike and Al, and then all of them watching helplessly as she allows herself to be taken as the portal closes, it's all really well done. It was just in service to a bad ending. This is where this phase of the episode ends, and we head into the epilogue set 18 months later. Somehow, despite killing numerous soldiers, they seemingly escape with zero consequences, and yeah, this is probably something they were trying to keep hush-hush, but they quite literally were brazen enough to shoot up the Byers house in season 4. Would they really be above just chucking these guys in some off-the-book prison and calling it a day? It's one of those suspension of disbelief things you just have to deal with, I guess, like Hopper coming back to life. We pick up, as I said, 18 months later, and the early section of this is framed by Robin doing a guest stint at the radio station again, but this time with no Steve to back her up, because he's taken a job at the school as a coach, which just feels right. That being said, it was rather melancholy to see that their double act is split up as they both got older and moved into their adult lives. It makes sense, but it's also really depressing. Robin says that today they're going to celebrate the youngsters are now graduating from high school. This is when we cut to our party once again. Max is skateboarding out the front of Lucas's house when he comes out all dressed up in his gown and acts massively cringe, but in an endearing way. I did see some people ask how she could possibly be graduating with the rest of her friends after she missed so much school, but I would argue she has a bunch of nerd friends and plenty of time to catch up on what she missed. It's not really that unbelievable to me. We see Dustin with his mum posing happily for her photos, but she's on the verge of a breakdown because her baby's graduating. He hugs her and says that he's only going to be a day's drive away, and that it's all going to be alright, and then he poses for more pictures, which is followed up with Will, Hopper, and Joyce getting videoed by Jonathan to celebrate Will's graduation. It was really nice to see Hopper had been integrated into the family after once again losing his. I also found him and Jonathan butting heads about needing more takes after the sheep fell down to be really funny. All of this was just a nice palate cleanser, honestly, as so much of that finale with the gate was bleak and sad. Abused person commits suicide to stop the cycle, or a person whose family was taken from her again and again is forced to abandon her new family and never see them again to ensure the cycle breaks. It sucks no matter what way you slice it, and so seeing these happy moments just makes it all feel a bit better. Joyce gets a call from Karen telling them she can't find Mike, which leads to Hopper going out and finding him sitting by the memorial. Hopper tells him that Karen's freaking out, and Mike replies that he had to get out of there because she wouldn't understand why he isn't okay with graduating, as even close to 2 years later, he feels like it would be a betrayal to Al. As if he's ready to move on with his life and accept what she did, when he just isn't. Hopper then tells him that he can't blame himself, and then instead, his only real option that isn't self-destructive is to accept that Al made her choice. You don't have to like it, and you don't have to understand it, but you have to accept it and do what she would have wanted, to live the best life he can. It's actually a really powerful scene, and whilst I still don't really care for the way the story played out in that respect, at the same time, I did like this interaction, and I thought it was really wholesome and heartwarming. We move on to the graduation scene where everybody's come out in support, even Derek, who's sitting with Holly, so they've become actual friends, which was really sweet. Mike and Hopper arrive, and Mike and his mum get a cute little moment before we head into Dustin's speech, which kind of starts off strange where he's talking about D&D, but quickly pivots into fight the power, screw the authority type of things that gets the crowd pumped up and farewells the ghost of Eddie. Dustin well and truly lives up to the Hellfire legacy, and of course the students go wild, the teachers rage, and I think my favourite part was Dustin's mum agreeing with every single thing he says and being super aggressively into his speech. Oh, and then there was the principal freaking out at the end, demanding they all sit down and screaming that they have detention and summer school. Mike at this point looks at the speakers and remembers the sonic weapons when Al vanished into the Upside Down and starts formulating his idea on how she possibly could have survived. I think my favourite part of this scene though is Dustin's friends reacting to the speech afterwards, particularly Lucas getting all giddy about the reaction of the principal. Just made me laugh. At this point, the popular girl that wouldn't dance with Dustin in season 2 comes up to him and invites him to a party, and it was a bit of an awkward conversation, but very funny to watch nonetheless. Mike isn't having any of that though, and decides there's something way better for them to do that night. Play D&D. However, before we come to that scene, we have to wrap up the storylines for the older members of the team. First up, it's Jonathan, Nancy, Steve, and Robin. We check in with them and see what they've been up to in the last 18 months. Steve stayed in Hawkins and likely will remain there for the foreseeable future. He's the baseball coach and the sex ed teacher, plus he's close to buying a house. We learn that Jonathan's gone to NYU just like he dreamed of doing, and is trying to become a filmmaker with the typical student themes where they try to get all metaphorical and deep. His current movie is about a woman who eats and eats, and the more she eats, the hungrier she becomes, as a commentary on capitalist and consumerist society. It will also probably be very bad. Then there's Robin, who's enjoying college life, whilst Nancy's dropped out to take a job at the Boston Herald as an intern. They all talk about how whilst they enjoy their new lives and their new friends, it isn't quite the same feeling as when they're all together, and so they make a pledge that they'll meet up once a month to hang out and reminisce in Philadelphia. God, this scene just made me sad, you know? They all move away and move on with their lives, and whilst they claim they'll always meet up once a month, you know it won't be the case. place. I'm not saying they're going to fall apart or anything, it's just life gets busy, you know? For a fantastical sci-fi show, this part felt very true to life and honestly got me a bit teary-eyed too. We then check in with Joyce and Hopper, who finally get their date at Enzo's, and my god, it's just so sweet. Since both Jonathan and Will are seemingly going to be living in New York City, Hopper suggests they too should go and leave Hawkins and go somewhere they can start fresh. He says that he got a call from an old friend in New York that Montauk's looking for a new chief of police, and I guess he was offered the job outright, so they'd be closer to the boys and be able to start fresh. This just made me smile, as well as the proposal. It was a nice little wrap-up of their whole arc from season 1. After all the shit Joyce has been through, I do like that she gets a really wholesome and hopeful ending like this. This brings us to the final scene of the episode. The party is playing their final game of D&D, but it seems that they finally got Max to join in and play, and what do you know? She seems to love it and has become invested in the story, which I thought was really cool. It would have been a shame to exclude her from the final scene, so I'm glad they wrote it this way. This scene just goes so hard, to be honest, and is pure joy. Them all raging so hard when Mike's campaign looks like it's going to end in their defeat, with Mike getting into the roleplay and laughing at them all. Them all realizing they can summon some mage they met earlier on in their adventure, and going through all their books in search of the incantation. Man, this just feels right, doesn't it? To end the show like this, the very way it started. That hype moment where the mage appears and Mike continuing to get into the roleplay. It's just so beautiful, and at the same time, it feels so sad and melancholy. Because no matter how I feel about some of the writing choices the show made in the end, it doesn't mean I want it to end. There's nothing worse than wanting your favorites ending and knowing you won't see those characters ever again after this. After the ending of the campaign, Max shits on Mike's writing and demands a more comprehensive ending than just happily ever after. So Mike predicts all of their futures. Max and Lucas are going to be happy together in a small town. Dustin's going to go off to college and yet still have adventures with Steve, whilst Will's going to go to New York City and find a community and acceptance. He even gets a boyfriend, which was really cute. Mike in turn will become a writer, whilst he also tries to explain his theory as to how Al's still alive, which I still don't really think holds up all that well. I mean, look how fast she apparently walks while under the suppression power. It just doesn't hold up to what we saw before, but as I said earlier, none of the alternate scenarios work. Regardless, I think I much prefer the idea of her living and getting to build a new life, even if it is away from her old one, rather than just being outright dead. Both are pretty sad and bleak endings, but one is far more hopeful too. As they say in the scene here, I believe. And yeah, that section of the scene is so powerful, and so I was just openly weeping at this stage. No shame in that, especially when each of them puts away their binder and says goodbye to childhood, and the youngsters head down into the basement to replace them in their own game. I was not okay after this. I'm still not okay, honestly. Because even though the season had its ups and downs, and I don't think it finished as strongly as I would have liked, at the same time, I can't help but feel like this ending scene was pretty much perfect in every single way. Hell, pretty much the whole epilogue hit really well for me. I just wish the Al stuff was different, you know? So that's a wrap on Stranger Things and my extremely slow reviews. I'm only a month late on this one, I guess, which is better than nothing. And so with all that being said, these have been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the finale of Stranger Things and Season 5 in general? Did you like it? Hate it? Is there anything you would have changed about it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.